This is the Art of Network Engineering podcast. In this podcast, we'll explore tools, technologies, and talented people. We aim to bring you information to expand your skill sets and toolbox and share the stories of fellow network engineers.
Welcome to the Art of Network Engineering podcast. I'm one of your hosts. My name is Aaron Weiler. With me, as per usual, I have AJ Murray. How are you, sir?
Very good, Aaron. How are you?
I am excelente. Thank you, sir. Daniel, how art thou? You have the church hat on. I appreciate that. Thank you for getting dressed up for us.
Oh, thank you. Howdy.
Sunday best with his big Cisco logo.
Yeah, he's out here repping hard. Andrew, how are you, sir?
Hey, Aaron. I'm awesome, man. How you doing?
Well,
Andy, is that you on your t-shirt?
Yes, my wife got me a new t-shirt. It says Basquatch, so.
That's awesome.
It's a bass guy who looks like Sasquatch. Therefore, they combined the two words and made it Basquatch. I get it.
Yeah,
I get it.
Funny enough, it was a Christmas present that arrived a couple days ago, so shout out to the U.S. Postal Service for my Christmas present coming in February.
Thank you, folks. Thank you for
It was
all
a
the hard
happy
work.
surprise, so good stuff.
It was. Nice. So we normally we would do wins here, but we're trying to maximize time. So we have a very illustrious writer. I'm just making you blush on purpose. You guys have probably heard me talk about this on the podcast more than 100 times, but it's my favorite book. It's called Make It Stick. These guys are gonna make me look bad because I have the digital copy, but there's a reason I have the digital copy. It's because I like the highlights, and when the highlights come to me, like I'm just digital. Okay, all right.
Wait a minute. You're highlighting?
Yeah, I'm highlighting in the. I'm
The guy
I'm
who yelled at me
because-
that highlighting is useless? Hold on.
No. I'll explain later.
just kidding.
Actually, maybe I don't want to say that in front of Peter.
Yeah.
He's gonna yell at me. So we have Peter Brown, the author of Make It Stick. Thank you for joining us, sir. Thank you. Everybody.
Thank you for having me. Let me start out by saying that I am one of three authors.
Right.
I wrote this book with two cognitive psychologists, Henry Roediger and Mark McDaniel, who are experts in learning and memory, and they are cognitive psychologists at Washington University in St. Louis.
Wash U. Yeah. Beautiful. So Wash U is like a very highly credited like medical school, right? And then obviously the mental sciences and things like that. So it's a really, really good school. Those two guys, I have a feeling though, relied maybe a little bit more on you in this case, like in a different way, because I think it's one thing to have like the science like they do, right? Because I've read other books that are very science heavy, but they aren't that good at explaining it to someone who isn't a scientist. And I'm pointing directly at myself here.
Yeah. You could point at me. I'm not either.
Right.
Which is why I got involved.
So was it your idea to write the book, or was it theirs?
No, I should start by saying that Henry Roediger, or he goes by Roddy, has been my brother-in-law for 41 years.
Okay.
I've always known he was impressive, but I didn't really understand how much until I started working with him on this project. I was between writing projects. We were chatting at a family get-together, and he said, I've been working with this team of cognitive psychologists at a bunch of different universities. We've had a 10-year grant to do research into the question of what leads to learning, and we're coming to the end of it. And our findings are counterintuitive, and we're trying to figure out how we can get it out to a general audience. And so that was the germ that started our collaboration. I wasn't at all sure. I'd never written a science book before.
Right.
I'd written nonfiction and fiction, but not a science book. And so I was a little nervous about it, but I like a new challenge. And we sat down, and basically I felt that my role would be writing, their roles was being smart. And, you can't, like a normal, book that scientists or professors write together. You write 3 chapters, and she writes 3 chapters, and the other person writes 3 chapters. Well, it didn't make sense in this case. We were trying to write a book that someone like me who was a non-scientist, would be pulled through because it was interesting, and B, would come to understand the science in everyday language. So that's how we came to this project.
So before that, then you had no previous knowledge as to like how people learn. I mean, were you interested in stuff like that before, or he just said it? You were like, this sounds pretty groundbreaking. Because if somebody came up to me, a family member, and was like, hey, I just found out through a bunch of studies at my work that the entire public school system is a sham, I'd be like, yes, sign me up. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's earth shattering to me. I'm like, oh yeah, dude. Oh, where do we go? Like, I'll start writing right now. I mean, I'm not the worst writer in the world, but like, I would have been on the same page as you. So was that the first kind of like of you hearing about anything like that?
Well, I didn't say yes right away. I wanted to understand some of what their findings were that we're talking about. And fact of the matter is, I mean, I have a bachelor's degree in English literature. I don't have any higher degree beyond that. And I've done a lot of different things in my life. I've enjoyed encountering new things. I spent a number of years, 20 or 25 years, as an independent management consultant working with companies to help them with their strategic planning. And every time I'd come into a new client, I'd say, well, how does your business work? Well, why do you do it that way? Kind of thing. So I found, as Roddy it described to me what they're learning, I'm thinking, trial and error. I know that. You try something, doesn't work, you change your strategy, you reflect on it, So in this process, which involved a lot of reading of scientific papers and trying to understand them and asking questions of my co-authors and so forth, I just felt hugely affirmed about how learning works. And that notion of just, working at figuring something out is a kind of bedrock. So one of the things that we need to have schools understand is you've got to create situations when you're asking students to figure it out.
Right.
Create their own understanding of the new material. So anyway, that's a long-winded answer to how it was for me.
Hey, Peter, is this new science? Because the book came out in 2014, and I spent a scholastic career of doing it the wrong way. So is this new information? Like, why wasn't I taught this as a young lad?
Well, it is. It's been put together. A lot of the research is within the last decade or two. I would say most of it. I mean, we've understood this notion of a forgetting curve, thanks to a psychologist named Hermann Ebbinghaus, I think in the 1890s, where he documented how, after being exposed to something very quickly, your memory of it drops off until it begins to plateau down at a low level. It's just how human beings are. And so we've known that forgetting is a problem with learning, and that what you need to find a way to do is interrupt the forgetting. So a lot of this issue about long-term, durable learning is how you can seed it into the mind in a way that it stays, that it sticks. And that research really is recent. The power of what they call the testing effect or retrieval practice effect, spacing, and those kinds of strategies have really been researched and reported on over the last couple of decades.
Well, you said like some of the like highlights from me reading, just even in chapter 1 is the chapter is learning is misunderstood, right? Which sets the tone for the entire book. Clearly, that's why it's the first chapter. Thanks, Aaron, for that insight. But like there's just so many things that are just like gems to Andy's point that make so much sense when I think about them now. But I'm kind of echoing what he said, where it's like we spent so many years doing the exact opposite. Like you said, learning is an acquired skill, and the most effective strategies are counterintuitive. right? So
That's it. You got it.
Yeah. Oh, I wrote it down for a reason.
And we always pick the easy way, right? Because Aaron used to call me out on that.
Yeah,
Like,
hold on a second. Hold on, I'll
yeah.
get to that in a minute. I'll get to that in a minute. So when you say that, so learning is an acquired skill. So that begs the question then, how does one acquire the skill? Like, where do you go?
If school
All right.
isn't teaching it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Well, I think you got to back up and say, well, we all have that skill in certain areas of our life. I mean, starting with going from crawling to walking. You try it, you fail, you work at it. Or, when you get your first bicycle and you're trying to figure out how to stay upright on the dang thing. And so I think naturally what I found so affirming was that the science basically says this is how you learn. You have to figure it out. You have setbacks. You interpret that either as failure or give up or as information, and you carry on in a little different way.
Well, you have to define learning too, because for me, I always thought learning was getting it short term so I could pass an exam, and then I'd forget everything. That's
right,
my
Andy.
history of learning, and that's a problem.
Yeah. So if you take learning and go into the context of a school, then we're sort of looking at a textbook. We're looking down on the calendar that there's going to be an exam, and I got to remember these dates, and I got to put all this stuff into my head so that I can get the grade on the exam and continue on. And the way I look at it like this, a kid goes out for sports. Maybe it's a guy's playing football. He understands his relationship to the coach. Coach is going to give him some pointers. He's going to get out there and he has to do it. And then he's going to screw up a little bit. He'll get some feedback and he's going to fix it and he's going to practice it. He goes back into the classroom and sits at his desk and he expects the teacher's going to teach him, fill him up with whatever it is he's supposed to know so he can pass the test. It doesn't occur to him that the teacher, if it's a good teacher, is a coach and he's got to do the work of figuring this stuff out and trying it
On your own,
and getting some feedback that isn't quite right. What is it about this that's a little different from what I showed you? Okay. This iterative process is what learning is. And we've never set up schools, I don't think, and maybe there are exceptions, in which it's explicit from the instructor that I'm a coach, you're the learner, learning's a thing you do, it's not something I do. I will help you. I will give you feedback. And so we all went to school, all of us here, with the expectation that we were going to be taught and that we had to get the grade. And if we got the grade, we go on. It doesn't necessarily matter if we remember the stuff that we got the grade on. That's a bad system. But it's been our system.
Yeah.
So you tried it though a different way, like, and before we started this, like I kind of mentioned it because I went to high school like right by there. But you guys did some actual experiments in like an actual public school where you put some of the theory, kind of to your point, right? You test it, see if it works out, and they put that theory to work in the middle school, and. Specifically what it was, I don't remember exactly. I think you did periodic like pop quizzes instead of exams.
Yeah.
Is that how it was?
Yeah, it's a very simple deal, which is trying to compare the effect of retrieving something from memory with the effect of reviewing something. And so this was a middle school. The scientists, Roddy and Mark and their colleagues, got permission from the principal to do this research. And for example, in a social studies course, the students were studying, let's say, geography, and they're studying China, and they're learning the rivers of China or something like that. One of the researchers the instructor would step out because they didn't want the instructor to know what was being tested and what wasn't. Would step out and would give the students a little pre-test before a lesson. Then the instructor would come back, they'd get a lesson, and afterwards they'd get a little post-test. And then a week before the exam, they'd get another test. Now, a third of the material was quizzed this way. Another third of the material they took just as much time with, but it was reviewed. They were told, okay? They weren't asked to retrieve from memory.
Okay.
And another third of the material was neither reviewed nor quizzed.
Okay.
And so then they had their tests, and the stuff where they reviewed it didn't do nearly as well in recalling it at the test time as the stuff where they had recalled it but not reviewed it. So it just showed that reviewing something from memory, retrieving it from memory, as opposed to rereading or rehearing something, is a far stronger way of interrupting the forgetting, of securing that in your memory.
Like engraving, yeah.
Which was quizzing,
Cool.
right? They're pulling it back out of their memory via
Quizzing.
quizzes. Yeah.
Quizzing. Yep.
So would you suggest that's the best way to go about it then? Sorry, Dan. Like, because you're probably going to ask what I'm going to ask. Is that the best way to go about it then? Just keep quizzing yourself? I mean,
Yeah. As a matter of fact,
that's very black and white there. Yep, that's it.
Yes.
it is.
Yep, that's it, sir. It is.
Podcast over.
Thanks for
you.
stopping by.
It's a fact that retrieval from memory is far more effective at building durable retention than review. Now, there's many ways to retrieve something from memory. You can go out and practice it on the field.
Mhm.
That's a kind of retrieval, trying to remember and do something. You
Right.
can take a quiz. You could try to explain it to a friend over lunch.
Okay.
So lots of ways to try to pull from memory something that you've learned. Why is this effective? Well, you are in the networking business, right? I mean,
Oh, yeah.
the brain's a network. And
Definitely. Oh boy, if you're gonna make this make sense to a bunch of network engineers by using network engineer analogies, I might just leave because I have no business being here. I have no business talking. I have nothing to add. But please go ahead. Sorry.
I don't know anything about network engineering, but I know that this thing's got to connect to that thing, and then that's got to go off somewhere else. So that's the same
literally
thing with
it.
memory.
That's
okay?
it, dude. That's it.
Peter, you're hired.
Yeah. Toss in a couple $100,000, and there you go, man.
So with memory, when you encounter new information, it's recorded. They call them traces, like maybe electrical signals in the hippocampus. And if let's say you're going off to the grocery store and you're trying to remember 6 things, you have your working memory, and you can do that maybe or maybe not, and or you can remember a phone number long enough to dial it. But if you want something to be long-term knowledge, it has to be consolidated and moved into another part of the brain. And consolidation is a process in which the brain kind of iterates this back and forth a little bit and tries to figure out what are the big ideas. How does it relate to what I already know? And this happens largely in your sleep. Presumably it will move into a relevant part of the brain. And the next day, when you try to recall it, and it's a little hard, you're thinking, what were the main points? You're able to recall it. It strengthens the connections between the neurons. It strengthens the connections of the new knowledge to what you already know. So this idea of retrieving from memory is causing the brain to further winnow that knowledge, get rid of the irrelevant stuff, really secure the most important ideas, connect them to the other things you know so that you can find it again later. And so you need to have the information in the brain. You have to have good retrieval cues. Those 2 things help you get it. I mean, there's a lot of things we all know from childhood that we couldn't recall until maybe we catch a certain smell or someone says a certain thing, and that's a cue when it comes rushing back. So you need both. It has to be anchored in there, and then you have to have enough retrieval cues to find it. And the more things in your network of your brain that the new information is connected to, the more likely you are to find it again later. If you have a mental image of it, if you can associate it with a person or an event in your life, it helps bring that back.
So is that what a retrieval cue is? Something that
Yep.
Okay.
Something that
That's
helps
along the
bring it
idea
back.
of the memory palaces. So when you're trying
Exactly.
to memorize stuff, you picture a place that you're familiar with, like your home, and then you can associate things that you're learning and place them in a certain room. I tried that when I was studying before, and I understand the concept, but it's something that's new to me, and I don't think that I use it to its best intent. So it's still something I'm trying to use continuously and get better at. But
Yeah, AJ,
it's an interesting concept.
I'm about where you are with that.
I feel so bad now.
I wrote about it, I learned about it, and I've used it a little bit. And I have found that it works, but I don't have occasion to make a whole lot of use of it. For your listeners, the notion is you take a familiar space. Let's say it's your house. You walk into your house and you've got a coat hook and you've got different places in your house, rooms that you might move through. And if you're trying to recall something, or is it something you've learned, maybe you're going to be tested on it, and you want to be able to retrieve the ideas. You imagine walking into your house, and you take each of the ideas and you somehow associate them with a space that you're familiar with in the house. So that later, when someone asks you, can you explain this theory to me, or this, whatever the thing is, you can walk into your house with that in your mind and remember these places that are familiar with you, how you associated them with the ideas of this thing that you want to explain. So it isn't a way of learning, it's a way of organizing the memory, of being able to find it.
Are they all retrieval cues? Those rooms in your house, the drawers, that's
Yeah.
what you're explaining?
Yeah.
to me?
Right.
Okay.
So if I understand it correctly, when I was studying for the route exam, what I would do is, if I wanted to learn EIGRP, I put EIGRP in my dining room, because dining room starts with D, and D is how it would show up in the router, right?
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
And then
That's
I took
perfect.
OSPF and I put it on my back deck, because I took OSPF and I turned it into outside patio
Outside.
furniture.
Oh, wow. Outside patio furniture. Wow.
I'm going to remember that.
Yeah. And then I had like the different LSA type sitting with me at the table on my back deck, and
Wow.
it kind of worked. It didn't, I don't think I practiced it enough to have it work as best as it could. But reading in Make It Stick, the example that they gave was students at a coffee shop, and then they would see a plant and picture somebody having a coffee, and I forget the exact context of it, but it was more of a story than it was a specific, just trying to walk into a room and remember where things were placed. So I thought using the storyline to help recall that information was a lot more helpful, and I'm going to try that the next time I use that tactic.
Yeah, these were young people who are keen on some movies they really liked. They had the names of the characters, and they could associate it with different places in the coffee shop.
That's right.
Yeah, it worked very well for them.
Hey, Peter,
But
you mentioned something I didn't want to skip over. So you said consolidation happens in your sleep. So how important is sleep for getting this stuff into long-term memory? And I'm asking for a reason, because I don't sleep as much as I should. So am I shooting myself in the foot? I'm studying and I'm doing flashcards and I'm trying to remember, but then I get 5 hours of sleep at night. Am I doing myself a disservice? Because that's when consolidation happens, if I'm understanding it correctly.
This is something that science is still coming to understand, but both the neurologists and the cognitive psychologists are on the same wavelength, that sleep plays an important part. Understanding how that works is still being learned, but there's quite a bit of evidence that it is important. Through both the different forms of sleep you have over an extended nighttime of sleep, more than you get, Andy.
Right.
And
Yeah. I mean, I'll get more sleep if it helps me pass more of these exams. This is good information to get.
I don't know if is it more about the quality of the sleep versus the quantity of the sleep too?
Do you have to hit that second level of like rapid eye movement or whatever?
Yeah, I'm not authorized. I'm not smart enough to know the answer to that question. I will say this. Surely you've had the experience that I've had where you're working on writing something or figuring something out, and you're kind of frustrated with it, and you've done something with it, and then you leave it and you go sleep, and you wake up in the morning and you say, I think I got an idea, or it worked. You've gotten something in the night that you didn't have when you went to bed, because you kind of presented a problem. I think this is something that we don't give enough credit to our brains, that the brain keeps working on stuff if you give it an assignment. And then even I know in my life, when I'm struggling with something I'm writing, when I get to a certain point, my wife likes to go to the gym in the morning. I said, no, I want to work and then go to the gym. When I go to the gym in the afternoon and get on the elliptical or get on my bike, something about moving and all of that oxygen, I don't know what it is, but I feel like the brain then is working. When I said you're off duty, the brain works. And then I get the idea.
Yep.
I think that's part of this whole issue of consolidation that we're still learning about.
It's amazing.
No. Go ahead, Dan.
So one thing I was wanting to kind of go back on, though, is you were talking about the students taking a quiz before they even got the lecture, right?
Oh, yeah,
and
good
then
question.
they got a quiz after they got the lecture, and then they waited did you say a week, and then they got a quiz again, or was it right before the exam or something?
I think it was
that?
maybe a week before the exam.
Yeah. So one thing to our listeners, and I'm repping Cisco, and Cisco is one of the bigger players in our field, and the OCGs always have a "Do I know this?"
For Peter, that's official
Textbook,
cert guide. So
yeah.
we have to take certification exams, and they provide books. There's several of them on the shelf behind me that contains everything we need to know in order to pass.
I mean,
these
they're like
certification
this thick,
They're thick,
Peter.
awful
Yeah.
books,
Yeah.
Peter, written by
And
crazy people.
Scientists, right? They're scientists, like you were saying. Like you're trying to determine what all these scientists are trying to say. It's like, so what Dan's saying is that at the beginning of the chapter, there's basically a pretest before you even read the chapter.
Right. In the way I was doing myself a disservice on just skipping that and going straight into reading the book or reading the chapter, right?
Same.
And then afterwards, I would go back and take that test. And when Aaron started talking about your book and that process of, hey, before you even try it, quiz yourself on it and then take it. So I was like, you know what? I'm gonna give that a try. And I did it on one of the next chapters, and I took that quiz before I read the chapter. And then when I read the chapter, as I was reading the chapter, I remembered those questions, and it stuck with me way better afterwards. So that blew my mind that, hey, maybe I should actually try this.
Yeah, because why would you take a test on material you haven't learned yet, right?
Right.
It's counterintuitive. It's more of that counterintuitive stuff.
And that was my whole problem with it. That, I basically just I'm not going to take that out. How would I ever know that? But then it's like, oh, I see what they're doing. They're trying, you're
Trying to prompt you.
Yeah, exactly. And it worked way better for me. So I can attest to that your study. I felt much better after that.
Yeah, he didn't believe me. We had to get you, the actual horse's mouth, on this podcast to reinforce it.
No. You told me, Aaron, and I did it. So there you go. I believe
That's fair. That's fair. I mean, to be fair too, Peter, you said earlier, I'm not qualified to give that advice. Boy, oh boy, I am certainly not qualified to give the advice, but that never stops me one bit. I'm out here.
Aaron's always slinging advice around.
Yeah, it's mainly stuff from your book, but my problem is this is awful to say. I forget the details sometimes, and I'm trying to explain stuff, and you remember those sort of things because you wrote the book. But for me, I'm like, there was a test or this study they did with these people in a high school. You know what I mean? So I'm not very good at it, which is why this is helpful to actually hear it from you. So folks aren't just hearing it from me, because I'm just regurgitating what you said, right? So this is certainly helpful.
And I think one thing to add to that too, and I think the book, you did a really excellent job with this, is every piece of the book, there's some kind of example of it being used, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's between, neurosurgeons, baseball players, the pilot, all that stuff.
Jump school, all that. Yeah, I really like
yeah,
those
exactly.
stories. Yeah.
There's always an example of that being used, or why we should be able to remember stuff, like that. And so I think you did an excellent job with that. But, I obviously recommend our listeners to read that, because it's not a science.
Yeah.
It doesn't come off as a science book is what I'm trying to say.
Well, I don't. Yeah, right. That was one of my objectives, was to write a book that I'd be interested in reading. So I like a good story as long as it doesn't go on forever and has a point to it. But to your point, Daniel, if you are asked to try to solve a problem before you've been taught how, and you struggle with it, and you say, what is this like that I already know? Is it like this? Is it like that? And you struggle with it, and maybe you don't get it, but then your instructor or whomever says, okay, this is how you solve this problem, and here's why it's different from that or different from that. It sticks a whole lot better. Somehow you've sort of primed your brain to be ready for that answer. And in the simplest and also in much more complex tests, it's quite striking at how important it is to have tried to figure it out, then get corrective feedback. Let's say you're on a quiz or whatever it is, and be taught the correct answer. And then you apply it again later to, retrieve it and strengthen that. So it's just kind of amazing when you go through these studies. Now, the other thing is when you're reading something, it helps if you start with a question and read for the answer. So what I found reading these, I went through a whole lot of research papers and trying to understand what's the question that the researchers were trying to answer, what results did they get, and how do they explain those results, and what's the relevance of that to what I'm trying to write. And I would have to read those things a couple of times and then mark. Comes to underlining and highlighting, or that isn't a good way to learn, but it is for me a way to organize the bits and pieces that I want to be able to put together and describe to somebody else. And so it is not a study strategy where you figure you've underlined and highlighted and then you've reread that stuff later. It doesn't really help you out. But if you're doing it in a way in which you're going to harvest those notes and put them in your own words or write an argument for it, then it is. And that's when you discover, Aaron, to your point, I know this is it, but I don't remember why. You go back and look to see what the detail was that you really wished you could have explained it to somebody.
Right.
So it's an iterative process. I'm sure in network engineering, there's a lot of back and forth. You try something that works.
buddy.
Yeah.
So
don't you think at some point? Sorry, Aaron. Don't you think at some point, either through the education system or just life experience, that we interpreted failure as an end result rather than part of the process?
No doubt.
Because that for me, until I started, working with these guys in the podcast, and Aaron started espousing, the great knowledge that comes out of your book, and then I actually read the book for myself. Like, failure was like the end game, and it was, usually a huge setback. But once I read the book and started realizing, like, oh, this is part of the process. Like, it's okay to fail.
Like, you should almost be failing more, right?
Right.
Like keep failing.
Well, I guess you could make an argument that if you get it every time, you're not reaching far enough.
True. Yeah. Because like you said, make it effortful, right?
Mm-hmm. You want to reach. Somehow you got to have a foot in the familiar and the other foot into the new. Mm-hmm. You can't learn anything new if you can't connect it to what you already know.
Right.
Okay.
That makes sense.
So I think we have a problem with education system that's so dependent on getting a high grade in order to get admitted to the next level and all that kind of thing. And as opposed to somehow emphasizing taking the risk to figure it out and get it wrong and get the information from that and then finally create your own understanding and go on from there. This is the science in the book is having a huge impact. There's a lot of material out now on this science.
Oh, okay.
In medical schools and law schools and places where there's a lot of highly complex learning required. And a lot of these schools are restructuring their pedagogy around it.
Really?
They're cutting lectures way down, and they're moving to active learning exercises and team-based stuff.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, it's phenomenal, really. I mean, it's just amazing.
Yeah,
That'd make a big
I
difference.
mean, like, I'm almost scared to, like send my kids to public school after reading this book. You know what I mean? Because look, I'll just admit it. Like, I was awful at public school. Like, I sucked so bad. Like, I just can't retain information because I guess now learning that, like, kind of what Andy was saying earlier, is it just me? Is it just me? I actually made the comment last week in our group chat here with the podcast guys, it made me feel stupid reading this book, but in a good way, right?
Yeah.
Like it validated that, like Andy said, it's not just me, but also that there is a way to do it, and it's okay for it to be effortful. And to AJ's point, it's okay to fail. And in fact, the lesson I got was, it's like keep failing, right? Because the more you do it, like he was saying, it's like the more I was getting out of it, to the point now where, like, I'm almost like, I try to, like, torture myself, like, as much as possible. So I'll clarify a little bit. So, like, I make flashcards, when I'm trying to learn something. That's usually what I do. But I don't make, like, a flashcard that says, it has a one-word answer or something, like, is this true or false? That just seems like pointless to me.
You make
So
it
what
hard,
I do,
right? Yeah.
I make it as hard as I can, and I'll say, hey, explain this. And it just says explain this. And so I'll have to think and try to explain that whole thing in my head. And the first couple of times you do it, it just feels so weird. You're like, I know that. Like, it's so weird how you talk to yourself. You know what I mean? Like, because in your head, you're going, come on, Aaron, you know that. Anyway, let's just move on to the next thing. Like, yeah. And then you flip it over and you go, yeah, I knew that, right? But you didn't.
So
but
that
you didn't. But you didn't. That's a really important point.
Yeah.
That if students are being taught now that you need to do self-quizzing,
Yeah.
but you need to write the answer down and you need to check it later. You have to check it to make sure that you're correct, that your judgments of what you know and can do are right. Because a big issue is, am I a good judge of what I know and can do? And the best way to find that out is to do it, to show it.
Can you briefly, I think it's what you're getting at, can you briefly describe the illusion of competence, I think it's called, I may be getting the term wrong, but you think you know things that
Sure.
maybe you don't?
The illusions of knowing.
Yeah,
A typical situation would be where you've read something, text for an exam. You've read it, and then you've highlighted it, and you've underlined it, and then you you had some notes from the lecture, and you
wrote
the
those.
notes, and
Yep.
then you read the notes.
Yeah.
And you thought, okay, I've spent a lot of time on this. I'm on it. And you go into the exam and you don't do well in the exam. You feel like they cheated because they asked you, what is the answer? Why do you think it's that? Or whatever, and you don't have anything beyond the language that you read.
Right.
You don't have, but you have a fluency with that language and you mistake that for learning.
Right.
So
You just explained all of 2019 for me.
but there's another example. Let me give you a different
You
example.
explained my entire scholastic career, Peter, not just 2019. I'm serious. That was my entire study method. I mean,
Yeah,
I
no,
wish
that's-
this book
that's
came
true.
along 20 years ago, but thank God it's
Yeah.
here,
But it's true in sports. So I talk about the 20-foot putt. I don't know where I got that. But the idea is, you're trying to improve your 20-foot putt. So you do the 20-foot putt over and over again. And you see yourself improving, and you go home thinking, "Damn, that was pretty good," and you think you've learned it. But the fact is, it's all in short-term memory. It's built. You're leaning on what you just did. I was
Right.
just reading someone recently who was writing about this, who had read "Make It Stick," and he said this thing that I wish I had thought of. He said. Multiply 21 by 14 and tell me the answer. So he waits for a while, and someone will say, it's 294. Oh, great. How did you come to that? Well, I multiplied 21 by 10, and then I multiplied, whatever he did, he went through this process, and he got it. The guy said, great, okay. Next problem, multiply 21 by 14. Oh, I know the answer. It's 394. Well, how'd you come to that? He said, well, we just did it. He said, that's practicing your 20-foot putt over and over again. He said, to learn it, you need to go through the process and then go through the process. And so instead of doing the 20-foot putt in rapid succession, do it a few times, get a feel for it, then do some other strokes, then come back and do it again a couple of times. Then go do some other things and then come back. So this idea of mixing it up, you're really trying to learn, how do I judge distance, lay? I don't know the golf terminology, but all the different things that come into play, you want to learn how to be able to judge that for 20 feet, 10 feet, 30 feet, I don't know. And so to build that skill, you have to mix it up.
Yeah, there was a story. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, the kid
with the bean bags, and right, that blew me away because they just practiced at the one distance, and then the other group practiced at 3 or 4 different distances, and the ones
not the one they were tested on later.
Right, and the one they were tested on, they were so much better than the people who only did the quote unquote 20-foot putt. So that really blew me away.
So much better.
Yeah.
Like
that's amazing.
Whoa, that's crazy.
Yeah, that's like breaking my brain though, because I'm so used to like, I have to start a chapter and finish that chapter and then study over that and over that and over that. And then once I'm done, I put that chapter in the past and then I move to the next chapter. And then I don't ever go back to that chapter. And it's like, that's totally the wrong way to do it.
And then by the time you go take the exam, you've forgotten everything you learned.
Yeah, the whole chapter.
Chapters ago.
Yep.
Well, it's not hard. So the interleaving thing is something that's interesting to me too, because you actually hit on, I think, one of the more important parts about interleaving, which was the dissimilate differences and similarities, right? But different, but somewhat the same topics. In your analogy about the 20-foot putt, you said, yeah, it actually works better if you are doing the 20-foot putt and then maybe you do a 5-foot putt and then maybe you go hit a driver, right? But the point is, you didn't stop your 20-foot putt to go dunk a basketball and practice that, right?
Right.
Yeah. So same but different, and like different enough, which is why I think we have such an advantage. Like just these books that we get that are like gigantic, they are, somewhat curated into a bunch of subjects that make sense with each other, right? So like Dan can show you right here. I mean, these things are ridiculous. Yeah, I know. Like, why would anybody do that, right?
All these little lines are chapters here.
But I guess you could jump around, right? Because they're all
that's the idea.
Related. Yeah,
exactly. That's what I'm saying, and I think that's why this hits home for us, or why we can put it into practice so easily, is because we have that at our fingertips. And although it's a huge book and there's like 20 some odd chapters of, and each one of them is like 100 pages, it's still somewhat similar, right? To the point where, you can actually, and I'll just use a specific example, and Peter, probably sorry if I'm just not making any sense to you at this point, but like 2 different routing protocols. The thing is, they're both routing protocols, right? So it's perfectly okay, and it probably do you so much more good if you actually read them at the same time and decided, hey, here's my goal. There's a chapter on EIGRP and a chapter on OSPF. I'm not even going to read the chapters. I just want to know, what is the difference? Like, why do 2 exist, right? Like, why? Clearly, there's 2 for a reason. Why is that? And then work at it from that way. Because like what you were saying earlier is like, and you even quoted in the book, like the Einstein quote, right? Where it says, like, basically, like, who cares about knowledge? It's creativity. Like, this is the most important thing. And that's it. It's the problem solving. It's like, figure it out. What you're teaching kids biology in 5th grade, and it's like, hey, why do you think, how would we stop a disease? Just come up with some ideas. Like, what do you think it is? How would you stop it? Just crazy stuff like that. And like, I just feel like the world would be so much different if we were just taught that early on, to just think like problem solving, you know what I mean?
Right. How to think.
Yeah. How to think, and we always bitch about this. Like, my wife and I are particularly fond of bitching about how school never teaches us how to do our taxes and stuff. Like we're like, we actually had a conversation about this earlier, which is why it's so topical. Like, my wife is in healthcare. Like, she has a master's degree in a healthcare field. And she said to me, like, dude, I didn't know that I could use my HSA account to do this. And I'm like, what? Okay, how did you not know that? And she's like, no one ever tells you any of this. I'm like, dude, you went to school for like 8 years for this and you didn't know that you could use it. You know what I'm saying? But that's kind of the same idea. It's like, well, you constantly, we're just like waiting for people to tell us stuff, but like they should be more of just like let us go, like, just make something up. Even if it's wrong, just make something up, right? Like that's how somebody else figured it out.
Right. I enjoy that more in life than the other, trying to figure it out and make it up and then see where I got it wrong. I find out I got it wrong because the thing breaks, or I find out because I stop and ask someone, is this thing going to work? Or I look at how someone else has done it, right? But engaging with it, for sure is, I think, more fulfilling and leads to better learning. The whole thing about, the different router methods is sort of pausing to ask why and what if, right? And just asking those questions when you're learning something new. What if it wasn't this way? Or what if I did it that way? Or why, very simple questions that give you another dimension. Or what is this like that I already know? And I think about parallel for this, because those questions help make the connections in here and give you a third dimension to the understanding of the topic.
Wow. Hey, yeah, you got to be right too, because certain analogies have stuck with me over the years just because they were so good, right? Like a teacher, we've all had that. So
before we run out of time, I just want to ask, and obviously the overall message here is we've all read the book. It's blown me away. It's helping all of us retain more, and we work in a field where we're constantly studying and being tested, Peter. So this, I think our audience is a very captive audience for this. So I hope before we're done, maybe you can throw top 3 or 5 tips out of hey guys, here's what I tell you to do. And maybe we've been doing that throughout. But the real question I have is, we generally read those awful books and then we do some labbing and different things. And now I'm into the flashcards for, to pull them out of memory and quiz myself. But a lot of what we do as well is watch videos. So I guess what I'm wondering is that too passive? Am I wasting my time watching, someone's telling me something, but I'm not making flashcards, let's say, or is reading better? If that makes sense?
I can't answer that particularly. I can tell you that when I dismantled the dashboard of my Prius so I could get a new antenna plugged into the radio, the video helped me hugely.
Yeah.
But if I hadn't actually been doing it also, I probably wouldn't have learned nearly as much as the fact that I was using the video as a guide to help figure out when you can just jerk on something and it comes out. And when you got to find that screw and actually unscrew it.
And that's my point, is video is easier for me, but I know a big undercurrent or theme is, make it difficult. And maybe the video can be used as a complementary thing to making it difficult. But I'm right there with you. When I need to do something at home, I'm on YouTube. I watch a guy, and it's much better.
I've always looked at the video as like the pre-test, right? Like do I already know this? Like watch the video first, and that's the primer, and then I go read something, and then it's like, oh, that's what they were talking about in the video.
Right.
I think
right.
Okay. And what I've been
I almost think. Sorry, I was just gonna say, I almost think, Andy, like what you're saying. I think that watching the video, because here's where the disconnect is. I think, and just correct me if I'm wrong, Andy. It's like, okay, when I'm making things difficult and when I'm not making things difficult, like at what points should those be, right? And here's where I think this might help. So when you're first learning something, right, like your first exposure to it, I don't think it matters if it's a video or if you're reading something or someone's telling you necessarily. It's what you do after that, right? So how you originally obtain the information isn't as relevant as how you retrieve it. Does that make more sense?
So if I'm making flashcards based off a video I'm watching, it's probably the same thing as making them off of because that's what I've been doing lately, is I'm making flashcards as I'm watching videos. Because Peter, flashcards to me are the secret sauce right now. So I hope I'm on the right path. Because
you definitely are. It's in the retrieval from memory that the learning happens. It isn't about getting it in; it's about getting it out. You think it's about getting it in, but it isn't. It's about getting it out. And if you're not able to get it out, you got to go look it up and then start getting it out.
So one thing that worked for me one time, after Aaron went on his whole speech to us about all this, is I watched several videos, and this is where I'm going to go into a little bit of tech here, but I started watching several videos about HSRP, right? And after I watched those episodes, I started labbing them as I was watching them. So I would watch a little bit and then I'd do it in my lab. And then after I got done, then I wrote about HSRP in the sense of like, hey, this is, well, basically I was sharing my lab that I did. And I tell you what, that worked so well for me that I was
That would
like,
be
I need to
fantastic. Yeah.
yeah, I was like that. I need to do that to every little piece of this book. And I feel like at that point, I really get it.
Yeah. That's exactly right. So you're getting exposed to it, and then you're doing it, and then you're writing about it, and you're processing it at several levels, and then you're coming back to it.
So
Right.
I want to point out something, because I kind of secretly like bursting everybody's bubble.
Oh boy.
Don't do
Not
it.
no, I love it. I love it. I love it. Can you just briefly touch on quote unquote learning styles, please?
Well, yeah, learning styles. The concept of learning styles is basically that some people learn better as listening, others by reading, and some kinetically. I don't know. There's lots of different learning styles depending on who you read. And the underlying premise is that some people are wired to learn better one way than another way. And I suppose if you have sort of a condition like dyslexia, that's true. There are
Sure.
some ways that people with dyslexia learn better than other ways.
Absolutely.
But for most people, the research into learning styles has been unable to demonstrate that in cases where someone who considers themselves to be an auditory learner actually learns better when the material is taught in that manner than in a written way. There's just not a body of research to support learning styles. And comparing that to retrieval practice and mixed practice and spaced practice and elaboration and those kinds of things that have a large body of research, you're just better off going with what science shows works than trying to wrap yourself around the axle to translate some material into an auditory form or a visual form or some other thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, people get hung up on that so much, and that's like, I've just been trying to help people because I feel like, I just feel like it's a limiting behavior. Like if you brand yourself as someone who only learns from videos,
Right.
then you're just going to steer clear of text, and that's just not. You're just doing yourself a disservice there. So the science is saying otherwise.
Right.
I wanted you to say that because I've been wanting to say that for a very long time on here. I may have slipped and said it. I don't actually know. There's no
definitely
live.
said it.
Okay, well,
But Aaron had a good point. You had a good point, Aaron, in that people's learning style. I find this to be true once you called me out on it. And we had a very heated debate on this, I think. But
yeah, you guys, it was not pretty.
people, when they pick a learning style that they prefer, it's easier for them, right? Like I'm picking the easy path. So it's
That's
it's the
a
opposite
preferred
of what
path.
the preferred
path,
which
yeah,
is
yeah.
which humans are going to pick
Comfortable.
the easier path, I think, right? So that's the opposite of making it hard. Last question, Peter, I got to ask before we run out of time. I previously to being schooled to your book by Aaron, I used to take copious notes. I mean, I would rewrite textbooks, and I may or may not read them before taking the test. So I remember being taught that if you read something, you're taking it that way. If you listen, the more of your senses you can hit your brain with the information. So is there any value in writing notes of the information you're learning? Not flashcards, but actually just writing out things in note form, because I'm not doing that now. I'm trying everything in your book new for me in the past couple months, and I haven't tested yet to see how I'm going to do, but I've stopped taking notes besides flashcards. Is that a mistake? Is there any value in rewriting sections of textbooks? Because it seems like a waste to me.
Yeah, I think it's a waste.
Okay.
There's a little bit of research.
I
that
love
shows,
that.
Hey, I need to hear
love
that.
it.
There's
I
a
know
little
you
bit
do.
of research that shows
do.
handwritten notes are more effective for learning than notes on a keypad, because
Sure.
you have to synthesize because you can't keep up with handwriting, and the act of synthesizing the ideas aids the learning. But I think notes. Some people I've heard from say I've started writing down questions when I take notes.
Yes.
So I go back and answer the questions, and I find that highly effective.
Wow.
Okay.
People say, and I can see why that would be, because that's what you're trying to know is can I answer those questions? I find for me writing notes helps me when I'm reading material like research papers. I can get an idea and say, here's an idea. I'm going to write a little note about that. And I'm going to stitch ideas together. And then I'm going to construct an argument. That's a little different than what you're describing.
Yeah.
But there's a place for notes. But I think rewriting a chapter or something is not really useful to you compared to saying, what are the questions that I'm going to need to answer? Or calling up Aaron and saying, I just read this thing. Can I describe to you what it is? And ask me some questions about it.
Right.
So if I can make one change in my study habits, do you think flashcards is the biggest bang for your buck because you're going to be quizzing yourself and pulling it out of your memory?
As long as you use them right.
Yeah.
Well, right. You got to create decent ones, I guess, right?
Yeah, I think that the big ideas for me are retrieval from memory, and elaborating on that with why or what if kinds of questions. So it gives it what is it like that I already know, that kind of thing. The second is to space it out so that you come back to it from time to time, because when you get a little rusty at it, retrieving it is hard, and it strengthens those connections, and it will update it to other stuff you've learned in the meantime. So retrieving it with elaboration, spacing out your practice, like with flashcards, the ones you know well, put them further back and don't do them as often.
Right.
Yep.
And is the spacing about fighting that forgetting curve?
Yeah. The spacing is exactly that. So people say, how long to space? Well, it depends. You want to space it far enough that it's hard to retrieve, but you can do it.
Yeah. Hasn't been too
Okay.
Like the Goldilocks zone, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So this takes some effort, because that effort is firing up stuff, and it is more useful than doing it boom, 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 boom. So the third thing, so I've talked about retrieval and elaboration. I've talked about spacing. The third one is mixing up similar problem types, the practice of similar problem types. So
Interleaving.
In the book we call it interleaving.
Yep.
And so you're not spending a lot of time practicing a particular problem before you move on to another particular problem, but mix them up.
So would that be the 20-foot putt, the 5-foot putt? Is that an example of
exactly?
that? Okay.
Exactly. It's mixing the fastball, curveball, and changeup.
Right.
Instead of doing 15 of one and 15.
It's all baseball. You're not going from basketball to basketball, but
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Makes sense.
And I was chatting with a friend of mine who coaches basketball, and he said, well, we do that because when we do drills, they do all these different things from different points on the court. But the problem is they were doing the same thing at each point on the court. So it was like an LP album. You know what song is next, right? It doesn't help you.
So you almost have to because I literally wrote down "get rusty" because that's exactly what you're saying. Like it should be effortful, but like we just said, the Goldilocks zone should be effortful, but you still should be able. Yeah, but you could do it, man. I think, dude. First of all, thank you so much for.
Hang on, I have one. One more question to ask.
One more question.
So the book was published in 2014. I'm curious to know, has anything new come out since then? That maybe, obviously didn't make it into the book that, we could use as we learn.
I asked that question of my colleagues, and there's been some parsing of this question of when you interleave or mix stuff up, how far afield from one to another should you go? And it seems not real far. You want to stay within the domain. It doesn't help you a lot to jump between subjects and mix it up. I mean, that, yes, in terms of spacing, but not in terms of a practice session. Another question that people are working on is how do we get students early to understand these strategies and embrace them when they feel hard? And so there's some research being done in that area, but there hasn't been anything momentous that has shifted the understanding. It's just more fine tuning, I think.
That's
Well,
good.
I mean, as you mentioned, and this is still relatively new, like only in the last couple of decades, which I didn't realize and thought that was really interesting. So thank you so much, Peter, for hanging with us this evening. I'd like for you to, promote yourself a little bit. You said you wrote some other books. Can you share with us some of the other titles that you've written for our listeners that might be curious to read more of your work?
Where can we find your books, that type of thing?
What
Yeah.
network engineers
Amazon.
would be interested in?
We have hobbies too.
we have hobbies, Peter. Come on, back off, man. We're normal.
Oh, one book I wrote was called Jumping the Job Track, Security, Satisfaction, and Success as an Independent Consultant. That might be
Ooh.
something that would appeal to your
Oh,
book.
yeah.
It's
Yeah.
pretty old now. It came out in 94, but it was very successful. And
Wow.
it really is about, this is something I did. I left a corporate job and I went out on my own. And it's a lot about that you have a lot more to offer than you think you do, and not getting yourself too stuck as having to be an expert in this particular thing.
Wow.
Anyway,
Yeah.
That's right up our alley,
Yeah.
man. That was a good
Especially in
suggestion.
the last year, because we've had a lot of people coming from one industry into another because, the industry they were in collapsed because of COVID-19 and now they're finding their way into tech.
Yeah.
So I think that's way more applicable than you think.
yeah, well, as I say, it's a bit dated, but it's good. I don't know, other stuff I don't know that your audience would be interested in. The one possibility would be a historical novel I wrote in 2006. It was New York Times Editor's Choice and Washington Post Best Books of 2006. It was,
So no big deal.
it was a big deal to me.
Yeah.
And,
No, I'm
Totally.
kidding. That's yeah.
amazing.
it's set in the gold rush to Nome, Alaska in 1900. And I drew from my grandfather's diaries to give it a certain historical accuracy. And anyway,
Wow.
it's a good story.
Wow.
Huh.
That's
But
fantastic.
I can be reached at authors@makeitstick.com.
Okay.
If anybody wants to write, I have my books are at petercbrown.com.
We'll put all this in the show notes as well, so anybody that downloads it'll be able to get to all your stuff, so they don't have to remember us trying to spell things out because we're really not that good at it.
And depending on how good we did on this episode, Peter, you might want to prepare for an influx of technical nerds emailing you with that address, asking you questions.
Well, I might have
BGP question.
I might have technical problems at my end.
Oh, dude. Oh, this has been awesome, man.
It's been really fun for me. I've really enjoyed this.
Oh,
No,
thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
it's great, and it's been reinforcing like everything that we've been trying to help other folks out with here. So to hear it straight from your mouth, I think it means just a lot more than coming from any of ours, because you're much more credible than us for one, but your name is on the book, so you're responsible whether you like it or not. And hopefully the tides are changing here in the United States and elsewhere with knowledge. And my hope is that we don't have to have these conversations in the future because everybody's like, duh, right? And if you change that, that's huge, man. I really think that what you've done with this book, and I say all this stuff when you're not here, so don't think I'm just gassing you up because it's not my style. It's not my style, man. But the whole point is like if we get to this point where we don't have to use this knowledge and this gets completely forgotten about, like you have changed so much about the world, and just like your brother-in-law may have been the scientist and stuff like that, but like without people to feed that to us, plebeians, we wouldn't know how to read it, for one, because trust me, I've tried. I mean, we have a hard enough time with the stuff that we're supposed to be dealing with in our own subjects, So we greatly appreciate, yeah, and to hear that you're human too. So it's like, hey, that to me that adds a whole nother dimension to it. Yeah, and so we appreciate you being on here. And certainly like taking time out of your day to talk to all of us. So also be prepared for an influx of book sales. Just have a guess.
I'll let you know, Aaron.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So thanks, Peter. We appreciate you being on. And for the rest of us, the Art of Network Engineering, see ya.
Hey everyone, this is AJ. If you like what you heard today, then make sure you subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcatcher. Smash that bell icon to get notified of all of our future episodes. Also, follow us on Twitter and Instagram. We are at Art of NetEng. That's Art of NETENG. You can also find us on the web at artofnetworkengineering.com, where we post all of our show notes. You can read blog articles from the co-hosts and guests, and also a lot more news and info from the networking world. Thanks for listening.